IVM. Welcome to another episode of This Round is on Me. Stretching boundaries and thinking out of the box can really make a difference. This is exactly what Archana Jain, founder and managing director of PR Pundit, has been doing from the start. Belonging to the exclusive club of India's top 100 PR communications professionals today, her PR practice can be traced back to the late 90s. Archana, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you here today.
Thank you, Gauri. This is wonderful to be on air. And thanks for the very, very generous introduction.
No, absolutely. It's all the truth. So let's start with, how you realized that PR was going to be your calling and that you wanted to start an agency. So take us through that.
Well, let me begin with the fact that, it was really my first job when I discovered that I had a passion for PR. And I stumbled upon my first job in PR. I had done my master's in business economics, and I responded to an advertisement on a market research opening for a hotel company because I was like, okay, number crunching, looking at what the market insights threw up for any particular brand was really something that I thought I could, use my education, and I thought I had an interest in that. But at the interview, when I land up for that interview, I'm told, well, we've dissolved that position. So I said, oops, what do I do now? Do I really have a job? They say, interestingly, we like what you say. We like your background, education, all of that. We have a public relations manager's position. I said, listen, I just know. What do I know? I just led one sentence I could remember from my Kotler book of marketing. I said, that's all I know about PR. So what is it? So they said, you have time. I said, yeah, sure. So they handed over the manual to me, and I sat down and I read about what the job description was all about. What I loved about the job was the fact that, I was reporting directly into the director of sales and marketing. I had a dotted line to Singapore. And I said, whoa, this sounds interesting. And it got better yet. Once I joined, I had a secretary in my first job. And I had a department of graphics to supervise. And I'm like, I had so much learning in that first job because I had to learn about graphics, about collaterals, about supervising advertising campaign, refurbishing the hotel. When we were doing, the general manager turned around and told me, he said, listen, we need Indian art in the hotel rooms. We don't want these empty corridors with listless kind of, art. So I had to go around and look for, visit art galleries, learn about art. I said, gosh, this is the best thing that ever has happened to me. And I've never looked back. So 2 years from that, I moved on to another consulting firm, which was just starting off. 5.5 years of experience there. I said, well, it's time for me to set up PR Pundit. And that was the summer of 1998.
Wow.
And at that point of time, most of the PR firms were looking at very, very corporate work. And I said, well, there is an opportunity to do some consumer PR, to really build brand preference by creating certain compelling consumer campaigns that would create more brand trust and be able to sort of move products off the shelves into customers' carts and hearts, as I say.
Right.
So that's how I ended up starting PR Pundit.
Right. I mean, that sounds like an incredible stroke of luck that you sort of landed where you're meant to be, clearly. That's amazing. And it's funny, a lot of the guests I've had in the past have actually had very similar beginnings. So, I think that it's one way to find your calling for sure. I want to ask you, where you just talked about sort of consumer, the consumer space. Mm-hmm. And what you sort of initially said kind of sounded a little bit like advertising. And that's very different, obviously, from PR. But do you ever find that the lines are blurred for you between your role in PR and now what's sort of advertising. And of course, all of this comes under the umbrella of marketing. But does that ever sort of happen for you?
Absolutely. I mean, initially when we started off, honestly, PR was all about media communications, right? It was restricted. You pretty much, let's say a television campaign came into being, you were told, well, take it to the press. Today, it's different. It's a more integrated world in which we are consulting. So we get involved very early stage, looking at, okay, what is the brand DNA? What is the distinctive way that we need to communicate a particular brand? For example, let's say if you were doing a sort of campaign for a soap, it could be like saying, okay, celebrity is one option. Lux has already done it. Real beauty, well, Dove has already done it. So how do you create that aspiration for a woman? So we sometimes, at least in the more progressive clients that we work with, we're actually put on the same table with literally the advertising agency, the digital agency, maybe the social media, if it's a different agency, and PR agency, and we're all brainstorming. How is it that we can create a clutter breaking or a distinctive communication? And so it could begin with saying, okay, let's do some research. Let's do some insights. So we are being brought into the conversation fairly early on. And that is what has changed in the recent years. I think that's also because the profession has reached a certain maturity.
Right. And I think that that's something I'm hearing a lot of, which is that, this isn't something that you do everything and then you come to a PR agency and just say like, hey, now disseminate this out to the public. Like it's something that needs to be done from the ground up and be part of the process from the ground up. So I am hearing this, and this is very, helpful for brands that are sort of setting up now. And we've seen a lot of new businesses launch during lockdown, of course. So I think, this sounds like it's something that you need to be thinking about right from the get-go.
Yeah. So because PR is as a publicist, we are no longer just about inviting media to a press event, right? Or pushing out a press release. It's all about saying, okay, how can we maybe, creatively communicate to influencers? How do we give them more Instagrammable moments? How is it that we could foster a collaboration? Yeah. That's going to open the minds of communication to let's say, introduce the brand to a newer audience.
So I think that's one of the biggest changes, if I understand it correctly, from, say, even 10 years ago, where PR, which was traditionally thought of as a medium of communicating with traditional media, is now focused on a much larger sort of medium of communication, which includes, bloggers, influencers, etc. And that's something that I'm guessing is something that you have also incorporated as a, way of operating for PR strategy.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Yeah,
absolutely. In the 23 years that I've been managing PR Pundit, change has been the only constant companion. But honestly, that's what keeps us interested in the profession. Otherwise, it would be we don't want to do the same old. Right? Yeah. Nobody wants to do that. So PR, as I said, was advanced from media communications into a more integrated role. And the evolution of PR is usually balanced with what changes are happening in the landscape outside.
Absolutely.
And an important component is media. Every 6 or 7 years, we've seen PR develop. And in the 90s, when I started into the profession, business journalism was just about coming of age. We didn't have that many business titles of newspapers or magazines. There was one Business India, one Economic Times, or Business Standard at best. 90s, 90s saw the business journalism evolve. Then 2000, there was a flux of a lot of television. Right. Business India television came about first, which gave opportunity for businesses to go and talk about what they want to do, maybe able to raise funds, etc. Lifestyle and luxury brands, when they started knocking on our doors in about 2007, 2008 in large numbers, that's when the international titles also came in. Vogue, Condé Nast, all of that came in about that period. The digital era opened up for us in about 2010. That's when online media and platforms started emerging, or at least everything with the traditional print titles started investing a little bit in their digital avatar.
Medium, yeah.
And then in 2015, we had to embrace social media. And
Right.
social media, including influencers, that's when it happened.
So,
and now I'm talking to you on a podcast,
yeah.
which is really a function of 2020.
Absolutely.
Frankly, there was a time I thought maybe India is not going to be a podcast sort of conversant kind of country, but here we are. It's gaining so much popularity.
Absolutely. I mean, it was funny when I thought of doing this, a lot of people were like, well, nobody really listens to them. And I was like, well, okay, but I'm still going to go about it. And then suddenly in 2020, it's just blown up. You're absolutely right. But tell me something like, talking about social media, I mean, that's something that I am quite involved with when it comes to our business. It's really taken me, and I'm nowhere close to sort of understanding how to optimize the use of it. But it is a very different medium from everything else, including just the general internet and of course print media, etc. How have you personally been able to kind of evolve understanding this sort of new medium? And it's not just about the format, but it's also the audience, right? I mean, the people that you're reaching out to through social media versus business publications or TV, the audiences are completely different as well. So for you personally, I mean, you've seen this, like you just took us through this this evolution of media. So how have you personally been able to kind of keep up with this change?
I think today, we don't have a choice. If you have to exist, we have to learn the ropes of every new media, right? We have to master it, and somebody like me who jumps onto Instagram and I'm saying, really, early days, I used to say, whoa, should I be seen on that? But then I said, fair enough, I have to do it for the profession. And so I get sort of discounted by at least at my friends. And they say, yeah, she needs to be on it because of this. But otherwise, if I look at it, 70 to 80% of our work is digital and social today.
Right.
And we've launched hotel companies, beauty brands, like Narendra Bhavan in Bikaner was really a digitally optimized strategy when we had to introduce it because it was happening in the summer months. And we said, we need some quick returns. So we can't wait for long leads to take 2 or 3 months to publish. So let's get some people into the rooms quickly. A brand like a beauty brand like Too Faced, we launched right in the midst of COVID last year. And there was, we just did an entirely digital strategy for it. So I think when you step back and you look at it, how is that possible? It's only because there's an increasing influence of content creators in beauty, fashion, travel, tech that has enabled us to really embrace a strategy which is more digital, which is more social. Otherwise, there was no way that we could. And PR has to find the audience. If I'm talking to youth, in the old days, what would we do? We would go to university titles. They have rags that they publish, and we work with them. And we said, okay, because that's the TG that we ought to. Or we say, okay, no, I've got to sponsor the NH Weekender or, work with any of the music fests that are happening because that's where my audience is sitting. But today, I could work with Scoop Whoop, I could work with BuzzFeed, I could work with so many digital titles. And then there are influencers. I could go to Bhuvan Baum and I could work with Prajakta Kohli. So it's opened up a new avenues. I think it's made not, on one hand, it's complex, but on the other hand, I think it just opens so many doors to communicate.
Yeah, sure. So what do you think are some of the challenges then for PR professionals in 2021?
The challenges is honestly always going to be about one size not fitting all, right? So you have to constantly innovate and create. There is no way that you can say what worked last year is going to be just as impressive this year, right? So that, I think that is a challenge that we're excited about and want to scale. But sometimes the frustrations and the challenge comes beyond really the profession. It comes in the form of clients or brands or organizations saying, we want PR, but they really don't know what PR is. They don't understand how to employ it. Sometimes we are handed over to maybe a resource within the organization that doesn't understand the role. I think that's when you got to go back and try and educate them. And we fail. Sometimes we fail, sometimes we succeed. But the point is, when the failure happens, it feels sad that there is a great promising brand, but they haven't been able to really get the right resource internally to understand it, because they think PR sometimes qualifies advertising, that, it should be printed just the way they want it, not saying that, somebody else is lending a voice to their messages and hence making it suitable for consumption. They don't understand it. The other point, it's as consultants, I don't think we're remunerated sufficiently. And I say that with a rationale because we see the amount of spends that go into, let's say, collaborating with an influencer. And we said, okay, for one influencer, they're able to set aside a certain budget. That's not equivalent to the kind of fee that they pay us for a month's work. And sometimes young brands don't even want to. They're being tight-fisted about consulting fees on one hand, but also investing in meaningful campaigns. Storytelling, like if you are working on your own social media, you're well aware of the fact that, how important storytelling and the narrative is. And so how is it that you don't invest in the right kind of talent to bring that out, or the kind of technology or things like that? They just don't. They want just place our product. And, and that kind of will only take you thus far, right?
Yeah. No, so I think that, it's very interesting. I understand, I hear what you're saying. And, if you want a certain kind of output and a certain kind of quality, it requires an investment. And, I totally hear you. I have to tell you my perspective sort of on PR. So we've had our group for our F&B group for about 10 years, a little over 10 years now. And we started with a PR agency, to get going, because I had absolutely no idea how to go about this. And, what I found was that, of course, they were sort of an intermediary between us and the media. And, we were sort of having to obviously, respond and give all the content that the media was seeking. But they were kind of the liaison for us. And after a few months, when we got settled into our business and, I sort of started finding my feet, etc., I actually then decided to take on the PR and marketing in-house. And I have to say that I've been a firm believer of that ever since. So I just want to share my thoughts with you because, it's kind of, obviously, it's a contrary point of view to what, you would stand for.
Not at all, Gauri. Yeah. In fact, both models exist and models, and in fact, hybrid models exist.
Right.
And most clients that we work with are on the hybrid model. There are certain things that they will do internally and there are certain things that they will ask an external consultant.
That's actually a really interesting option, which I personally even also haven't thought of. And I always thought that it was like one or the other. And, and the reason I bring this up is because you talk about fees, and my rationale, more than, the thought of paying an agency to do this, was that it really stood me in good stead to build this relationship with the media directly. At the end of the day, through and through, they're trying to reach me anyway. And I often found that I was able to avail of the opportunities of being, in the media or being able to respond to a story quickly because they were able to reach me directly rather than, through an agency or whatever. And I've heard them talk a lot about the frustrations of dealing with agencies, and how we're one of the few F&B groups that don't have one. And, and just, I've gotten to know a lot of the journalists over the years. And so I just sort of, hear this refrain quite often. And why do you think that is? I mean, why are sometimes agencies not looked at favorably when it comes to journalists or the media?
So we've always had an adversarial relationship with journalists, and this goes back historically. For the simple reason is that because we are always trying to protect the organizations that we represent. And so if there is a story in which you don't need to be quoted, let's say if the phone ends up and you are answering the phone, the chances are that you will make a comment or two. While on the other hand, if the call comes into my desk and I have an opportunity to think through that and discuss it with you, the chances are that you might say, I'm not going to be able to comment on this, and use us to really
buffer that.
So in a way, that is what journalists have always
frustration
said
with. Yeah.
That, how come, you only want to be written about in good times. When there's a negative story, you're protecting your clients. So that became the genesis of why we said, no, they don't want us. But on the other hand, there are firms and there are individuals that are not so competent on the job that they do. And so they do give us a bit of the profession, a bit sort of a bad name, or let's say a less than desirable sort of desire to want to even engage with them. But I mean, we found that, touch wood, knock on wood, that, people turn around and say, well, yeah, thank God you guys are managing it. Now at least I'll get some flow of information.
Yeah.
So there is both sides. Certain times companies don't have the resources or don't make time to communicate as much, or you want to pick up the phone when you want to, and that doesn't work. It's a two-way street.
And this is where choosing your agency becomes so important, for a brand. But, you mentioned earlier about this hybrid model. Can we sort of talk a little bit more about that? Because I think that's something that, a lot of brands don't consider. They feel like it's all or nothing. And, can you sort of talk to us about how that would kind of work? Like, how do you sort of possibly use an agency for a particular type of medium or for even a specific purpose, to get somewhere or to be in a certain publication or for a limited period? Like, how do you see this kind of playing out?
Okay. I'll give you an example of beauty brand, right? A beauty brand we work with very, very closely, and we work with most of their brands is Estee Lauder companies. When Estee Lauder, the brand itself was being introduced in the market, they already had MAC Clinique in the market already at that point of time. It was an Estee Lauder sort of resource who used to manage the communication based in Dubai, who was going on maternity. And that's when they said, listen, we need somebody while she's away on maternity to come in and do the job. And it is the introduction, after all, of our flagship brand, Estee Lauder, into the country. And that's how we sort of came in. We did a great job for 1 year, but once she was back, again, we were asked ourselves, there isn't a requirement. But the quality of our work was so good that they came back and said, once, the presence was larger, they said, yes, we'd like to retain you. And for the last 8 years, we've been continuously working with them on all their brands, Jo Malone to sort of MAC Cosmetics to Smashbox, Glam Glow, etc., etc. Now, they themselves have a very large team internally, but the internal team has to liaise with the brand managers, to understand what are their requirements, sort of to work with them to say, where is it that PR can intervene and how it should be, work on the budgets that there are available from each brand, and then have us actually work together with the PR ladies there to say, okay, what should be the strategy? How is it that we can sort of work it? So there's enough role for both.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is in a case of a very large organization of a certain scale. But the moment you are small, yes, unfortunately, it can be one or the other because there isn't maybe enough work for two. So let's say if you're a young fashion designer or a restaurant that's opening up, right? One restaurant, I mean, you've got a 2-member team within your company, you can run it. You can pretty much run it on your own. We don't do anything which is crazily different to what your knowledge on F&B, yours would always be ahead of us. But we could come in, let's say, if you were doing a pop-up in a new city, right? You don't know the media there. So that's when you say, hey, can I get help? Or, let's say you're participating in a particular exhibition, seminar, etc. A fashion designer can say, okay, listen, this particular collection, I'm celebrating 5 years or 10 years, and this is a very special collection. And I really don't have the mind space to manage communication because I'm so consumed with everything else. My team I want them to concentrate only on the digital assets development because you really can't scale your team internally. So that's when a hybrid model will come in. Or if you have multiple brands, you could say, I'm going to do this brand in-house and I'm going to take my delivery model to someone else.
Right.
So both combinations exist and a lot of organizations do like I said, the hybrid model.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. And I think, we've done something similar. And often especially when you're starting out new, getting that support from the experts is no bad thing. It's actually, it helps you to focus on the things that you're good at and let those who are good at what they do take care of what needs to be done. And especially amplification is so critical when you're launching something new. I completely agree with you. Or like you said, when you're entering a new market that you're not familiar with and, or you're launching something like very special or it's a milestone.
Gauri, another aspect is talent, right?
Yeah.
A talent that you are able to attract is going to be somebody that, after 2 years will say, I can't keep doing the same thing. I moved out of my hotel company job because of the fact that I had done everything possible. So then it means rehiring, retraining for you. Now that is something that we manage. So you're actually letting a third party manage it. So that's another advantage.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that, it's something that you just have to weigh up with having those. It doesn't prevent you from building those, those networks with the media directly. And that is equally important. That's something that should be invested in, personally as well. So, I completely hear you on this. So, Archana, we're going to take a quick break before we continue and we'll be back with more.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you're not following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We'd like to thank the sponsors on the network this week, Cred, Syed, TheWholeTruthFoods.com, and PayPal. We really appreciate your support. So this week on Cyrus Says, Cyrus had some interesting guests. Gayaz Irani was on to talk about his new Netflix film, and Mayur Tekchandani has made a new coffee table book about the city of Mumbai, which he came to discuss on the show. On the Wire Talk, Siddharth Bhatia was joined by Dr. Ali Khan Mahmoodabad to talk about the Muslim community's issues during these thorny times. On The Habit Coach, Ashton Doctor is joined by Sonia Jas to talk about the importance of fitness and why this is a great time to begin a journey to good health. The Simplified Gang has reunited and they discuss the hue and cry around the European Super League that was eventually just dropped after 2 days. On Shunya One, Sheila and I are talking to Gurubat from PayPal India. We talk about fintech, the future of digital payments, and a whole lot more. Really, really deep and interesting conversation about PayPal, its plans in India, and what kind of hiring they're looking to do. On The Millennial Athlete, Tanvi and Shlok were joined by sport and performance psychologist Dr. Shri Advani to talk about mental health for young sports stars. And I just want to again mention some of our cricket shows. The IPL season is on and you should definitely check out Edges and Sledges. And we also have a Hindi show called Khel Neeti. Do check that out as well. And with that, let me get you back to your show.
So we're back with Archana Jain from PR Pundit. Archana, I want to talk to you about, we talked briefly about the rise of micro-influencers, right? So for those of you who aren't familiar with the concept, it's not your traditional influencers with, large numbers of Instagram followers or followers on whatever platform.
YouTube.
Or YouTube, exactly. Actually, why don't you explain what micro-influencers are?
No, absolutely. No, there are tiers and tiers of influencer. Right on top, there's the mega, then the micro. Then what we are getting to work with a lot more is the nano.
Oh, okay. That's a new one.
So nano is anybody under 10 is a nano.
Wow.
And that is where the market is shifting to. It's not that the megas are not going to be useful. The megas are going to be, but we're living in a world where budgets are tight, right? So mega influencers eat up into a lot of money. And that doesn't serve the purpose. And they're beginning to also seem less authentic.
I was going to come to this. Yeah. I mean, this is the, the whole thing. So influencer marketing came in because, a lot of people felt that celebrities weren't authentic, whereas, a layman user, a real user was, had a lot more credibility. And,
Yes.
But what we found, or at least what I've been seeing in our industry, and I'm sure this is happening across the board, is that, everyone's always praising everything. And that sense of credibility that made influencers so popular is slightly sort of, losing its value to some extent. And what we've seen happen now is the growth of the anonymous influencer, like your Diet Sabyas of the world. And, that's got this incredible following because it seems that it's very, real, honest opinions. And are you sort of, how does this work for you? Is this sort of a sign of what's to come, that, the honesty can only come through a veil of anonymity? And, how does this affect your ability to connect a brand with the audience authentically?
Okay, so let's look back as, what is the motivation of using influencer marketing? It's ultimately, or influencer communication, it's really meant to convince the consumer to buy into a product or a service, or believe, or change conversations, mold their perception. And research after research is showing that 1 in 2 consumers believe that anything that a influencer says online is to be the truth. And 2 out of 3 trust influencers' words, messages far more than any amount of advertising. So that is where influencer marketing play has come to it. Plus, when you do the returns on investment for the kind of effort that goes into influencer marketing, either bringing them to the restaurant to dine, or to be able to sort of gift them some particular product, or maybe do a collaboration, that also yields enough results. We've sold phones, we've got hotels sold out, we've got restaurants doing exceedingly well, fashion labels, beauty brands, etc., everything kind of. So that is certainly, and you're right when you say that, earlier it was the domain of celebrities, but now influencers seem to be edging them out and grabbing endorsements, etc. But like I said earlier, one size does not fit all. You can't go to Miss Malini to do everything. It doesn't work. That is where the landscape has matured. So now I need to find people who genuinely like their food to bring them to your restaurant. And hence, I have to look at an influencer, study their feed, and see how much of their feed is really all about cuisine. And do they really know it? And I will then bring them to the restaurant. It's about mining very, very carefully the people that matter. And people's opinion, it counts. Who's following them? There are some very, very pretty girls, out there who frankly would be great clothes horses. But when we mine them, we find that their following is all men. So I can't put a fashion brand on them because the audience is only boys who want to look at a beautiful body. So that's the kind of research that you need to do to bring influencers onto the table. And sorry to say, but that maturity in the market is just building up. Not enough people do that. And hence it goes wrong.
Mm-hmm. So then it's when your data and analytics really kind of
come into play.
Yeah.
More than that, the way you would put out a message would be different to what I would put out. So don't give us a typical message to put out. It doesn't work for us or both of us to say, we're launching today, blah, blah, blah. No, I need to put it out in a different way to what you would do it.
Mm-hmm.
In your own words, in your own language. And hence our teams work with the influencers on customized content creation, which is true to their feed, which sits well. I mean, that's exactly what we would do with the print title, right? A Vogue will not write the story the same way as an Elle does. Or a GQ doesn't write about it the same way that a Man's World does it. So if we can tailor our content or our message or our narrative to suit each title, why aren't we doing it with influencers?
Right.
And then you will find success in these partnerships, in this communication.
Yeah. I mean, I have to admit one thing. I mean, I get sort of sent things occasionally to post pictures about or whatever.
Yes.
And then sometimes I'll do it for something that I haven't been sent, but I genuinely felt was great and, that I enjoyed using or trying or tasting or whatever. And I know that my communication about the thing that I'm doing sort of authentically or sort of which is self-motivated, is so different from what I do as an influencer, quote unquote, when I'm sent something and I feel kind of obliged to do it.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if that sort of is becoming more and more of a sort of, and again, I look at things more obviously from an F&B perspective because that's my space, where very few people will actually be honest about a place, a review of a place, and I think that's, like I said, I mean, coming to this point of anonymity, do you sort of find that a challenge for yourself? I mean, of course, you may identify the influencers who are actually doing things with a large dollop of integrity, but there's a fair number that aren't, and that's given rise to this sort of, this anonymous influencer. So how do you work with that? Or how do you deal with the completely sort of brazen, no holds barred anonymous influencer when it comes to the brands that you're representing? Or
I think that's great customer feedback. You've got to look at it like that.
Right.
If your campaign is a ripoff, you will be called off that. I'm sorry, but then you've got to do genuine work. Social media is going to be a double-edged sword. It's going to give you, yes, kudos, but it's going to obviously also give you very, very candid feedback from minds like some of them will sort of openly introduce themselves and not hide under the garb of anonymity at all. But some of them, yes, may do so. But look at it as feedback. Be able to take that on the chin.
Right.
In the old days, you would spend millions and millions of money for doing a research on that. So here it is.
Yeah, it's the
so we counsel clients on that. We constantly have to sometimes write back what should be the way that they need to respond to a particular tweet or a particular Instagram post that is being called out. Sometimes, yes, it's maybe ignoring it is better. But those are the principles of crisis management that you have to put into place.
Is that a big part of your service offering, crisis management? And is that something that, is not necessarily part of the sort of service, but it ends up being a requirement?
No, it's very much part of our scope of work. And we wouldn't be in PR if we couldn't manage a crisis. From managing deaths to fires to everything, we've done that. Social media, where there's actually been breach of protocols, data sort of privacy norms have been breached. So there's a very complex world out there. Yes, you have to manage it. You have to communicate what the organization is doing to correct it. What is it that has been done? Making that better known is definitely part of this whole thing. And social and digital communication requires instant, literally attention. So we've got to be available late in the evening. We've got to be available on the weekends to do so. And so be it. That's the nature of our profession, our practice. Yeah.
Are you seeing a growing shift towards purpose-based communication? Is the purpose now the product?
I would think it is, because how else do you distinct, like say if you're 4 credit card companies, what would you be different? Everybody's offering the same deals and everybody's offering the same interest rates. There's a brand that of jewelry, I think in Notan Das or something that had used to have Neetu Singh and her daughter. Then came her story with, real woman, Shovita Dulipala. And then now today, see Bhima Jewelry breaking stereotypes with the journey of the transgender. That's got the fascination. Mm-hmm. So there's a message that all brands want to associate with because the audience wants that. the socio-economic behavior patterns or do in a way sort of shape consumption and perceptions or align preferences really of shoppers or audiences, and we need to work in tandem with that. People don't want to know that a soap adds the gloss, right? Or it's what celebrities use. They certainly want to see a brand which is doing good work and has a purpose. So the purpose could be from saving the world from plastics. It could be with the saying, okay, can I make the ocean safer? And, don't let the plastic go in before, collect the plastic. Or you could say, there is domestic violence is at stake today. There are issues, children's education, feeding them, masking up. All of these are purpose-led communication that certainly have come mainstream today. Because even if you weren't doing anything, the fact that you are aligned to that thought becomes a message that you need to definitely put out.
Right. So would you advise brands where, not that becomes the story, but that, and not for the purpose of obviously PR and marketing, but that it is important for brands to have that giving back in some way or, doing good. What I'm hearing is that it is important for brands to be thinking about this.
Certainly.
And
every
time. That's no more an exception, but it's kind of becoming the rule.
No, absolutely. I mean, we saw so many restaurants at the time last year when the migrant crises put out really sort of food for people who were left homeless, etc. You're seeing the same trend happening now as well, where people are cooking for people that are affected by COVID. So that's their sense of giving, right? That is expected of them. So it's not just because, while on the one hand, yes, they do it from the goodness of their heart and because you believe in it. But I think the audience that is seeing this communicated on the social media feed certainly feels proud that, we go out and eat at such a restaurant, or we subscribe to their services, whether it's buying donuts to sort of buying a jar of, Absolutely. It feels good. In a way, we say, okay, we're helping in turn as well. So I think that sense of fulfillment is there amongst really the millennial and the Gen Z a lot stronger than the older generation. Or, this
Absolutely.
entitled
edge off.
Yeah, this entitled generation.
It takes the edge off this consumerism, right?
Consumerism,
like that's the whole
totally.
Thing. That, exactly. Yeah.
And I think these guys have right from the beginning wanted to be associated with real purpose. Young generation doesn't want to be doing work only because it sort of helps them pay the rent. They don't need the money anymore. They luckily their parents may have helped them fulfill that requirement.
Yeah. I want to ask your views on, and this is sort of actually an extension of our conversation about influencers, your views on paid PR. I mean, do you feel that is, of course, from a brand's perspective, it is, it's part of the mandate, but do you feel that as a consumer, that is fair reflection of a brand?
Okay. If you were to poll people and ask them that the news in Bombay Times or Delhi Times, is that news and is that, they don't know it's paid. You and I will know it because we've done it, right?
They say that it's an advertorial. I mean, it says it under
the...
Does it not? I thought it said it under the... This paper is essentially an advertorial. Okay.
But the point is
more, right? That like if the reader or the consumer doesn't know it, do you feel that in any way it's ever kind of sort of pulling the wool over their eyes?
I think I've always believed that we need to do something what is, a combination of, we call it POSE, right? Paid, owned, shared, and earned. So earned is a very important element, and that's what people come to PR firms and says, okay, or you hire a PR manager to say, okay, and we get some earned conversations around it, right? But then came the fact that, let's set up a website. Let's have our own social media handles. That's owned. That provides you to tailor the narrative to suit your brand. Then there's the shared, which is about someone else communicating, which is the influencer or anything. And then finally, there is the paid version where you pay somebody to communicate that. And that could be in the form of an advert per se. It could be in the form of an advertorial. It could be in the form of a collaboration. There are, even when it says collaboration, Gauri, you are very well versed with communication and this field, but the majority, I would think 98% of the audience doesn't understand the difference and they're not interested. They're very happy to see good content.
Right.
So if the content's got to be good, and I think that should always be the backbone to anything that you do, paid or earned, it's got to be good content that is disruptive or clutter breaking, or at least grabs the attention of the audience that you want to reach out to.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt, there has to be something that grabs your attention, that stays with you long after you've seen or heard or read.
Viral worthy. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, viral, but also just something that resonates, right?
Yeah.
And but I think that then the importance of authenticity is also taking, a bigger place. So the virality is one thing. Touch with that authenticity of or integrity is probably a better word of the communication, and not sort of taking your consumer for granted or underestimating your consumer.
Fair enough. You don't need to do that in a clandestine manner. You can put advertorial in there, and I think media titles and influencers, etc., do make that well known, where they are receiving, let's say, funds to put out that message. Like when you take somebody out, to a familiarization visit, you said, I was hosted by so-and-so, and you make that known in the copy, but you will still read that.
Right. Of course. Absolutely.
Yeah. Because if it's well written, if it's poorly written, you're going to say, what rubbish?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, so.
What are your views on personal branding, and how does it play a part in corporate or product branding?
So, Gauri, you do this as Gauri yourself, or you do it for the institution that you represent?
It's both. And I think that obviously the overt impression is that I do it for myself. But I think that the sort of side effect of this is, of course, it's going to, have an impact on the institution as well. And so I think that, it's a great win-win. No, I mean, absolutely. And I think that I personally think that, it's really important to do it. But I'm just curious to know what you think, where often, for me, it's different because this is sort of, Jay, my husband, and I sort of built this company, and it is our baby. And so I'm, of course, going to go, talk about it till the cows come home in whatever direct or indirect way. But do you ever feel that, I've seen this with chefs, for example, where sometimes the personal brand overtakes the product. And
yes.
So, it's just curious to know how you where you feel like a personal sort of brand story is important, and where you do emphasize that when it comes to your clients.
A dynamic leader is always going to be valuable for growth of a brand or an organization. But there has to be a context in which you put out the message. You can't be seen talking about just about anything and everything, or doing it insincerely, right? And we do get requests where, okay, just get us out there. And I say, no, it's got to be as part of the organization that you represent, because that is who you are. Unless there is a reason why you're doing this particular venture and it's a different venture. So we believe personal branding is important, and it builds pride in the team that works with you to see that, okay, this is my leader, and this is what they are either doing as a philanthropy in terms of philanthropy, or this is their views on management. It could be any of those, So, for example, if you go in second time and speak to management graduates or at the hotel management institution, you're essentially lending your time and knowledge to them. And that's good and healthy for the growth of the organization, right? And why shouldn't that? And that's good thing. But it's, again, if it's authentic, genuine, credible, sustained, it will lead to certain it'll rub up in the right manner for the organization. So it's got to be managed carefully. But don't want to be in Hello Magazine for the sake of, okay, I want to be a popular face. Then it kind of goes wrong. Sometimes it may not even be relevant.
Yeah. So tell me some of the trends, like where are clients investing their budgets? Are there any hot areas that we've missed or you're privy to?
Pretty much. I think we've covered all of them. Digital first strategy is playing dividend for sure. You're seeing that, online outreach is the growing ask and people are very happy to invest there. Influencers, like I said, nano, because the mega ones are way too expensive and honestly not authentic enough to connect, because, you refer to your own peers, right, for recommendations. Whose recommendation to check for a restaurant, whose recommendation to check for jewelry, whose recommendation to check for tech gadget that you want. You have already your friend circle sort of, and that's what it does. Storytelling on social media. It's nice to see people investing in that. And that is definitely going to be a hot area because you can control it. It's on your own medium. You're growing your own medium. Why ever not? That's for you to control and grow on your own. And we touched upon purpose-led communications. Yeah. Associate early into sort of small income generation schemes that you can help somebody. For example, it could be just an organization that's starting up to say, okay, I'm doing bamboo related, let's say containers, and you encourage them. And that's your way of giving back to that community. It doesn't have to be donation of, for oxygen concentrators at this point of time. But it could be just something else, an issue that's, or encouraging an organic farmer that you sort of give them an opportunity to sort of supply to you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just flipping it to your end of the sort of, your neck of the woods, what skills or tools are most important for a PR professional today?
Passion. Without that, we're not going to succeed anywhere. Yes, insights and creativity go hand in hand, definitely. But to be broadly speaking, yes, good written and verbal communications are important. You need to be fairly networked because, like I said earlier, it's not just about getting press to come to an event or publish a press release. It's about knowing, okay, where is the great florist and who is trending that I should also associate with for, the flowers of my event, or, the best macarons in town that I need to sort of gift to my customers, or is this cheese that is something that people want to come and try, or there's the kombucha that needs to be on the table. So, even knowledge on that becomes very important. So we're looking for a curious mind that is wanting to always keep themselves alert on the pulse of the now, contextually be able to throw things up and saying, oh yeah, there's Mother's Day coming up. Oh, there's Father's Day coming up. Simplistically put, but more serious days. There was workers, safety and health, World International Day of Safety and Health at Workplace. That was yesterday. So, I got quoted on something. So that's how I knew. And I said, interesting. So there's contextual writing that happens. So trend spotting, what is trendy? We see that in the food and beverages too, right? How,
Absolutely.
People are seeking conscious living, or people are thinking about all of those. So yes, what is it? Plant-based diets. So, those are things that, you need somebody, and it ages
their
no
finger
bar.
on the pulse, basically.
Finger on the pulse of the, the now and the new, as they say.
Yeah. Archana, I'm going to take a quick break before I let you go. I have a last few questions, which is what is our rapid fire, where you just say the first thing that comes to your mind.
Done.
We live in an age of disruption, of immense change in every aspect of work, life, and business. But is the old way of doing things truly dead? And are we ever going to stop saying the new normal? Join me, Varun Dugirala, on Advertising is Dead every Tuesday as I talk to entrepreneurs, leaders, creators, and change makers from across business, media, marketing, and beyond to dig a little deeper into how we got here, what we're doing now, and where we're headed. You can catch all the episodes of Advertising is Dead on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get your podcast from.
Okay, we're back with Archana. So this is the fun bit where I ask you a few quick questions and you just say the first thing that comes to your mind, right? So
Done.
What is your one favorite comfort food?
Spaghetti.
Oh, yum. Yeah. A great book you've read in the recent past.
I can't, recent past, I would think I would look at one or two titles that have read, really left a mark on me. Has been Hungry Tide, or Tides was it, with by Amitabh Ghosh. Oh my God, absolutely loved it, or reading Lolita in Tehran, Azhar Nafisi, or when I read Siddharth Mukherjee's book on cancer.
Wow.
Oh, The Emperor of All Maladies. Those kind of books really sort of, yeah. And honestly, in this lockdown, I haven't been doing too much reading, sadly.
Working harder than normal.
The damn Netflix has got
Oh, yes. Yes, of course. Hasn't it got us all?
Well, I actually got an opportunity to actually catch up with Crown because I hadn't seen it while before lockdown. And I said, okay, now it is. I'll actually see. Yeah,
I know.
But other films are better. Yeah.
The best investment you've made in your journey?
I think the time that I've committed to PR Pandit, honestly, that's been so fulfilling to see. We are a firm which is 85% women, 100% leadership on the top is all women. So that's, and some of them have had an opportunity where they've had to take a break to have children, but, come back part-time and continue working.
It's amazing.
And pursue their career. Yeah. So that's been fulfilling. Yeah.
Who have been your role models or mentors, if any?
Women I admire, I could say, right? I mean, so I guess she's known more longer there. Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
And at the moment, I guess, I like Angela Merkel. I know she's a hot toss woman and she's not going to maybe not win popularity, but I kind of like. So those are women that I kind of admire. And so, I like the way they work hard at where they are, they've had to work hard. And that kind of, in a way resonates with me because nothing's come easy, Yeah. It wasn't given on a platter to us. We've built what we've achieved so far.
Absolutely. Finally, what would be your message to the young leaders today?
Persevere, persevere, persevere. Honestly, if you believe in an idea, don't give up on it. The first 3 years is going to be very tough as an entrepreneur. You almost want to say, that's how I used to say, I was so much better off doing a job. Why did I do this? But and the fulfillment thereafter is certainly worth the hard work that you do. So believe in what you want to do and know it's going to be a long journey there, but don't give up.
I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you so much, Archana, for being on the show today. That was very enlightening and hugely inspiring. So thank you again for taking the time.
No, thank you for having me on this. This is a proud moment. Thank you.
PR is no longer just about running after press. It has evolved into so much more. And I hope you found it useful to hear Archana's insights on how brands need to be mindful of all the new avenues available to them. I hope you enjoyed tuning in today. Do catch the earlier episodes when you get a chance. And more importantly, I would love to hear from you with your thoughts on the show. You can find me on Instagram at Gauri Devidayal or on Twitter at Gauri Details or LinkedIn. Either way, sit back and relax because this round is on me.
Whether you're an established sports person or a budding one or simply a sports enthusiast, join us, Tanvi and Shlok.
We are two passionate pro badminton players talking policy, mindset, and everything sport.
So tune in to The Millennial Athlete every Monday.
Only on the IVM Podcast Network.
Trust us, it's gonna be lit.
From uncensored and unfiltered chats with the who's who of the entertainment industry, I, Siddharth Kannan, bring your very heartcake chat show called Candid Kannan. Tune in every Friday on the IVM Podcast app or wherever you get your podcasts.